Hey, so a while ago on this here YouTube channel, I began a series called Art Teacherin' 101. And in that series, I would share a lot of my favorite tips and tricks and hacks and things that I found that work really well in my art room. And I figured, well, if it works for me, maybe, possibly, it could work for somebody else. Oftentimes, we are the only art teacher in our entire school. It's very lonely and it can be really hard to find ideas and resources. So knowing that, I loved to be able to share anything that worked. Eventually, I put a lot of those ideas and tons more into my book, which I happen to be sitting on, Art Teacherin' 101, which is for art teachers in anywhere in their art teacherin' life, whether it be in the beginning of your art teacher career, middle, or even at the end. You can find this book, Art Teacherin' 101, in the link down below. I taught kindergarten through fourth grade art for 25 years in the Nashville, Tennessee area. And I packed everything that I learned from that experience into that book. And even though I'm not currently in the art room, I still get loads of questions about teaching art. And today I've got two questions that I've gotten recently, and I thought they were perfect because I could combine them and answer them all in one. They may seem like unrelated questions, but I'm gonna share with you how I brought these two together. So the first question is, when you have a classroom full of students and they're working, how in the world do you get them to work calmly, quietly, and with focus? My second question, which may seem completely unrelated, but wait for it, I'm going to bring it together, is with all the things that we are trying to teach in the art room, how can we also make sure that we're teaching art history? I gotcha. Let's talk about the first one. How can we get our students to work calmly, quietly, and with focus? Something I found that worked really well with my older students, because those are the ones that I really struggled with when it came to noise levels, was reading chapter books to my older students while they work. I love reading aloud. I mean, I think as teachers, we all do, but as our students get older, they don't respond as well to picture books and us reading them. I mean, I still do and did, whether they liked it or not. But one thing that they really enjoy is listening to you read aloud from a chapter book. Many years ago, I had a combined class. It was close to 40 students. They were very loud and rambunctious until I started reading to them. Suddenly, they didn't need my help as much. They were able to work a lot more independently. All of a sudden, they remembered where things went and where to find supplies because they didn't want to interrupt the story that I happened to be reading. Over the years, I read a bunch of different kinds of chapter books, but one of the kinds that I found that they enjoyed the most was the kind where they had a decision and the different phases that we were going to take in the book. Now, I'm going to push the pause button right there so that we can jump to the other question, which is how can we incorporate art history when we're already trying to squeeze in a bunch of other things? And so you've got to think of sneaky ways to sneak in art history, and that's what we're going to do when it comes to reading. So knowing that I wanted to have a class that was working with focus while I had a chance to read to them and making sure to squeeze in art history, I started writing a Decide Your Direction art history based book. I wanted to make a book where the kids really felt themselves living out the experience, going on this amazing art adventure, learning about different movements in art history and different famous artists, all while they're still working with focus on the project at hand. So that's how I wrote my book, Find Your Way. So Find Your Way is a decide your own direction art adventure that I would read to my students while they worked. In this book, I feature 7 different artists. There's Vincent van Gogh, Frida Kahlo, Augusta Savage, Leonardo da Vinci, Hokusai, Salvador Dali, and Claude Monet. I wrote the book in first person and in present tense. So while you're reading it to your students, they actually feel as though it is happening to them right at that moment. So that you can get a little bit of a taste of what it's like to go on one of these art adventures, I'm just gonna dive in. I just opened up a section of the book. This is actually when you're in the midst of hanging out with Leonardo da Vinci and Mona Lisa, and this little chapter is called The Flying Machine. I've always been interested in airplanes, so maybe I can help you with your flying machine, you say as you examine the drawings that Leonardo has laid on the table. Mona Lisa lets out a frustrated groan as she throws herself down on a chair opposite the easel. She crosses her arms and glowers at you both. "Don't mind Mona Lisa," whispers Leonardo. "One day, people all over the world will know her and your painting," you whisper in return. "Not if he doesn't finish it," yells Mona, trying to hide a smile. She wonders if perhaps you're right. "As for you," Leonardo says, tapping you lightly on the shoulder, his silver eyebrows wiggling, "you just might be known for flying like a bird. Let's see if these wings I have created will fit you." "Wait, what?" you say as Leonardo places large wooden contraptions on top of his drawings. They have the shape of wings with leather straps where it appears arms will go. Is he thinking that you will wear this? "Oh yes, I think they'll work," he says as if reading your mind. You start to object when suddenly you hear a soft creak and you see the door to the art room has opened. You see a shadowy figure opening the door and peering inside. Who could it be? Should you call out and let your presence be known? So this is where you and your students get to decide. And when it comes to deciding which adventure to go on, I always put it to a vote for my students. So I would tell them the 2 options, or sometimes there's actually 3 adventures that they can go on, and then I would have one student count how many votes that particular adventure got. Whatever one won the vote is the adventure that we would take. So here's the 2 options. Do you put on Leonardo's wooden bird wings and attempt to fly? If so, turn to page 204. Or do you call out to whoever is at the door? If so, turn to page 181. I also wanted to make sure to fill the book with tons of illustration. As a kid, I loved chapter books with drawings, and I know that whenever I shared drawings from books that I was reading to students, they really enjoyed it as well. That's why for every adventure, there are some drawings for you to share with your students. Now I want to share with you my top 3 ways to make this chapter reading experience even more engaging for your students. In my room, when I would begin reading to my students, this was after I was done giving directions, after all of my students had received their artwork back, they'd gathered their supplies, they were settled in, and they were working. After directions, that usually took us about 5 minutes. And from there on out, the hope was that they were going to work independently, so that they would know that now was the time for them to work independently, and I was going to be reading. I would bust out my handy dandy open and close sign. I have talked about this sign a lot, so I'm gonna link some videos on the other ways that I use this open and close sign in my art room, and I'll link it down below. But for this purpose, here's how I use this sign. After the kids have gone and they've gathered their supplies and they're in their seats working, I always put the sign to closed. And what that signifies to them is that now is a time where I am reading. And so you can't come up to me and ask me questions that you probably already know the answer to. Also, in my art room, I do a little something called Art Teachers in Training. Art teachers in training are essentially a table captain, and that table captain would be able to answer most questions. Like, for example, if a student didn't know where a glue bottle was kept or where they could go get paint or a piece of paper, the art teacher in training or the table captain would be able to answer that question for them, so that you, as you're reading, aren't constantly being interrupted by small questions like this that their friends could easily answer. So this sign that says closed just means I'm reading, friends, so unless it's an emergency, please don't interrupt. Thing number two to help make your reading experience even more engaging is a way to change your voice. So you have your regular teaching and instructional voice, and then you'll want to have a reading voice. That way the kids know, okay, now's the time to settle in. We're about to go on this amazing art history adventure. And I love using this microphone. It's got a great echo to it. And this way, when you're reading, it changes the voice. It makes it a little bit more mysterious, and I think a little bit more interesting. I also have what I call my Brittany mic, which is a little headset mic that I also like to use because then it was hands-free and I could still be doing other things with my hands if I needed to while I was reading to the kids. Another tool that I love to have is I have a little thing called a sound machine, which I don't happen to have on hand, but I'll make sure to link it below. It had just a bunch of different fun sound effects on it. So sometimes I would choose one student and they would be in charge of sound effects while I was reading. If you don't have something like that, you don't need it. You can just have the kids make sound effects noise. For example, when you have something that's mysterious or strange, you could say, "Can I get a dun dun dun?" And of course, they're going to chime in with that. So having some sort of sound effect or noisemaker or anything like that helps keep the kids engaged while you're reading. Now, one thing that I kind of struggled with when it came to reading out loud is when art class is over, and trust me, when you start doing this, they are going to be devastated when art class is over because they absolutely love going on these reading adventures. But it's going to get a little bit tricky to remember where you were as you're reading with what class. So one thing that might help is having a bookmark. Basically, this sheet is like bookmarks, but for all of your classes. If you have a lot of classes, you could even add another copy of this sheet to the back. All you have to do is write the teacher's name there, and with a dry erase marker, just write the page number that you left off on. And this is free, so I will make sure to add a link for it right down below. So all that to say, if you are looking for a way to bring more art history into your classroom, and if you are looking for a way for your students, and I read this book to my 2nd through my 4th grade students, because I only taught up to 4th grade, I probably would have read it to anybody who would listen, but 4th grade was my oldest. If you're looking for a way to bring in more art history and have them work with focus, I recommend highly reading to students, but for the art history component, you might want to take them on a Decide Your Direction art adventure. Thanks, guys. Be sure and look down below for all the links I mentioned. Toodles!